Hello everyone. Today we're going to look at the if else and else statements. So go ahead and let's take a look at our YouTube calculator that we had finished in the previous tutorial. What we're going to do is we're going to find out why we used select case when we could have used if statements. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just comment all this out temporarily. Alright, we're going to go right below it, and we're going to use if statements instead. Alright, so an if statement is essentially saying if this occurs, do this. So we're going to say if calculate equals this, and then int 3. You know what, actually we're just going to, let's just take these case statements. Let's make our lives easier. You will actually want to type yours out, but I'm going to just do this for me. Because, again, lazy developer here. Keep that in mind, developers are quite lazy. And this is essentially how we work. So I'm just going to grab this. And I'll go over this in just a second. Okay, so here is our statement essentially that we have. We start out with the if. We're just simply saying if calculate equals this, or the plus sign, then we're going to do this. Or I'm sorry, we're going to do this. Else, if it equals the minus, then we're going to do this. Else, if it equals the multiplication, we're going to do this. Else, if it doesn't equal any of these, or if it's not any of these, then it must be division. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to divide. Now, let's test this to make sure that this actually worked. So let's go 1 plus 1 just to make things simple, just to compare. 2. 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. And so on and so forth. Alright, so clearly these two work. These are two separate ways to doing it. Now, the reason why the select case, I'm going to go ahead and comment out the if. The reason why the select case, though, is a more preferred way of doing it is because it's a much cleaner way of doing it. Essentially, it's essentially a developer's, what we prefer. It's a more defined, easier way to read it, essentially, from a developer's perspective. However, at the end of the day, it's however you want to write it, but I can tell you right now, 9 times out of 10, most developers are going to select or use the select case for this type of thing versus using a bunch of if statements. Alright, so that is pretty much a primary example of if and if else and the else statement. I know that's pretty basic, but to be honest with you, the if statement, there honestly isn't a whole lot to the if statement. The if statement is pretty much like true-false comparison, essentially. It's just saying if it's true, do this. Else, go to the next line. Else if it's true, this is true. Else if this is true, or else, if nothing else is true, then do this. And the else works kind of like a try catch. It tries these variables, and if none of these are true, then it just runs this. Now, we haven't discussed try catch, but we will soon. Again, and I know I keep saying a lot of things that we're going to try soon. We haven't tried it yet. Trust me, we will get there, and it'll all make sense. Unfortunately for us, we just have to slowly step up to it. You have to understand the basic concepts before you can get into the more complex concepts, and I wouldn't even really call them more complex concepts, but it's really just a good idea to understand all the different routes that you can take, essentially. But just note that this statement right here, how we did this, is exactly the same as this. There is no difference between these two, essentially. It's strictly format. One's cleaner than the other. However, this being said, there will be many times where you will want to use if statements over select case. Select case is commonly used when you have a drop-down menu or you have a large list, like what we have here. We have a large list of options, so you would want to use that. If statements are primarily used in small statements, like you would only probably have an if, an else if, and an else. Now I know that we only have one more additional else if statement here, but believe me, it is a big thing in the programming world, and it would be frowned upon. So it's little things like that that you might want to start picking up on as a developer, and just really note that as a side note, that developers are really that lazy, and they are that picky essentially as well in how they write their code and how it should be formatted. I don't make the rules. It's just kind of the way it is. I mean, it's just kind of the way it's always been. If you feel comfortable with writing out a bunch of if statements, more power to you, but I can reassure you that later on down the line that you're going to want to switch to a select case anyway, and you will find it just a better practice eventually anyway. When I first started developing, I used if statements. I didn't like select case. I think that's probably something, a little phase that every developer goes through, because I understood if statements, and I began using select case more and more, and the more I used select case, I actually started using less and less if statements and more select case, and to the point now where I've been doing it for so long that I kind of balance it out between my if statements and my select case. The cool thing about if statements, another cool thing about if statements, is we could also do this, and you can't do this with select case, or at least not very easily. You can say and if, make my syntax here, there we go. Now this is a doable statement. Now we'll never ever hit this statement, just simply because you can't have two things selected at once. I mean, we could change that to where you could have another drop down to where calculate could equal both of those, but right now this statement right here, it'll never hit this statement. That'll never be true. This being said, I want to show you another thing, so we can compare these. And I want to show you what this is called. It's called essentially how to set breakpoints. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll show you how the breakpoints work. Alright, now to get breakpoints, essentially what I did is I just simply mouse over here to the far left hand side. And these little red dots are called breakpoints, and you can click on them to remove them or add them. What's going to happen though is every time that I run this application and I hit this sub procedure, or I click the button solve, it's going to stop when it hits this line, and you'll actually see what I'm talking about. So let's go ahead and do it. And this is for debugging primarily. This is where you would commonly use for debugging. So let's go 4 plus 4. And you see it's stopped, it's highlighted it. It says calculate equals plus sign. Okay? Now I can put another breakpoint right here, and it's going to hit this line right here. In fact, I'll show you all these other lines that it's going to skip because it's not going to hit them, so you can see the difference. Now see, it hit this line, so it's going to do this command right here because this value right here was true. And see, it skipped right down to the bottom, to the end if. So it skipped all these others because this is the only one that was true. And then it's going to exit out of this end if, and it's going to go right here to the label. It's going to say the text is going to be equal this plus 8. So let's double check to see what it says. And voila, see, that text says the equal sign plus 8. Well, it didn't say the plus, but it just has the, the 8 in there. Alright, so it did exactly what it's supposed to do. So that's how breakpoints work, and that's essentially how you're going to troubleshoot code when you have problems trying to get something to work. Now, let's go ahead and use the select case. So we can see the difference here. So let's go ahead and set our breakpoints here, and we'll see what happens when we run the select case. Because we know we're going to get the same outcome, so we'll go 4 plus 4. By the way, you can do that as well if you don't want to press the up and down keys. You can just type it in. That's the advantage of a numeric, and you can only deal with numbers. Alright, so calculate says that its value, or its string value, is the plus sign. And that's what it's going to be looking for, the same as our if statement was looking for. So it's going to say, okay, the case plus sign, okay, it found it. It's going to execute this code. And it's going to skip the rest of these because it found the right case. It's going to end its select, and it's going to jump down here too. So virtually no difference between the if statement and the select case on this choice. However, in our case, a good reason why the select case is better than the if statement is because we're using a combo box. And that's the main reason why I preferred to use the select case over the if statement this time, because I was using a combo box. And I have to set that expression anyway to that selected index on the load. See right here, I had to set it to that anyway. I had to set its selected index to 0 anyway. So it's just easier just to set it up using that select case. By the way, this is a select case too. Even though it says selected index, and this one just says select case. These are virtually the same thing almost. It's still selecting a case statement. The selected index is like a list or an index. It's creating an index or a list essentially for the CV expression. And these are the case statements, or the items that are listed in that index. And these are the items that are listed, or the case items that are listed as well. And this index essentially, it's just a minor difference though in the syntax essentially. This one's referring back to the combo box, and this one we're actually creating it independently of anything else. Like it's not dependent on this object right here. This one it's technically not an object, it's just pulling values from a pre-existing object, if that makes sense. I know that may be a little fuzzy right now, but trust me, as you work with select cases, that will become a little bit more clear as time goes on. So as you can see though, this is the difference why we used the select case here over the if statement. Now, that being said, let us go ahead and save our project. In fact, let's go ahead and remove this. Save that. And let's open up our hello world. Now we have the center button here. So let's do something fun with that. Let's do a nice little if statement with that, okay? So let's say, let's drop down a few lines here. Let's say change color. Say change text color. So we'll say if LVL hello world dot for color equals color dot black, then and let's give it, let's go aqua. Alright, there we go. Now this is just a very basic if and else statement. So let's go ahead and play with this. Let's see what happens. As you can see, we're changing the color of our label object just by pressing a button. And we're using an if statement this time. And the reason why we're using an if statement this time is because it's a very short statement. We wouldn't need a select case because we're not pulling from another object. Like we're not using a selected index like we were in the other one. We're just simply changing the color. We're just simply doing a basic comparison. So this is a really good example of where we could use an if statement with the else. So what it's saying is essentially right here is if the color is black, we want to change it to aqua. And we're saying else if it's any other color than black, then we want to change it to black. So I could set this color at any color we want it to. Right here. And it's always going to turn it back to black when we click it again. Because it's going to cycle through once. It only cycles through once. You know, once it hits this statement, if this statement's not true, this statement's obviously going to be true. But if this statement's true, it's going to only execute this code and then it's just going to end. Alright, so please post your questions if you have any more questions or concerns about if statements, the else, and the else if. I know we kind of brushed through this a little bit. Nevertheless, you know, this is pretty good stuff. Just make sure you review it, practice this. One of the things I can't stress enough as well when it comes to development, practice. You know, only doing my tutorials is not going to help you at all. You need to go out and do your own tutorials as well. Just practice what we've done, take samples and just play around with what we have and create your own samples. Because just doing my sample is not going to, you know, teach you anything. It's not going to stick. So you need to go out and you need to practice your own samples as well. Alright, so thank you, and please post any questions that you have, and please feel free to subscribe. Alright, thank you.